All right, next up, Gartner is going to be here to talk about the latest public sector security governance strategy. Bob Smock is a vice president with Gartner Security and Risk Management Consulting Practice and currently leads the Gartner Public Sector Security Team. Bob has more than 35 years of experience in the industry, and prior to joining Gartner was the Director of Information Security for the NASA Space Shuttle program. Please give a warm round of applause to Bob Smock.
Thank you, Russ. I apologize up front for the slow walk to the stage. As Russ mentioned, some of us were delinquent in getting our presentations in on time, so I had to give my new AV buddies a little bit of time to transfer the deck over to where it needed to be so it could be displayed. And Russ, great idea. Thank you for attending first thing in the morning on the second day, sometimes easier said than done. Great idea, Russ, on the whole Reader's Digest approach to the second day, kind of get people in the mood and get back into the swing of things. So let's spend a few minutes talking about security governance. Blah. Okay, let's all face it, but between you and I, all right, security governance is not the sexiest topic in security, correct? Right? Nobody is going to run clamoring out of this session this morning and run over to the exhibitor aisle and start wandering up and down going, tell me the latest and greatest security governance approach. It doesn't happen. It's not bright and shiny. But what I will tell you, and what we're going to get into briefly this morning and in more depth this afternoon, is that security governance is the most important thing, as you have already heard from a couple of my colleagues this morning, the most important thing you can do to ensure the success of your program. Let's go ahead and take the negative look. It is the most important thing you can fail to do to ensure the failure of your security program. Right? So, not very exciting. I will try to entertain you and make it exciting, but it is vitally important for our success. Let's make sure I can work this thing. Maybe not. I got it. Okay. Security governance. So when I ask you, think about security governance for a second. What do you think of? Many of you, and I've had the pleasure of working with many of you already, especially the folks in the California Military Department, CHP, Emergency Services, and they all have military backgrounds like I do. So the first thing we think about when we talk about security governance is this. Yes? Cracking people over the head going, you're not doing security right, you need to fix something. One of the things that we've learned from hundreds and hundreds of security assessments that Gartner has conducted all across North America over the past 5 or 6 years is that agencies and departments are actually finally getting it. Again, you've heard from our colleagues in Oregon actually saying, yeah, I was learning incident by incident, and we're finally getting the idea. The message is getting through. Agencies and departments understand they're not doing well. What they're lacking is, how do we do better? Now, as I started off this presentation, I gave you the other aspect of security governance. When I asked you to think about security governance, especially in a first of the morning session, that you, right? That's the way it is with most people. Again, it's the most overlooked thing that we don't do in security. I was once given the best praise I have ever been given in a speaking engagement when I was speaking to a large audience in Las Vegas. Who doesn't like to go to conferences in Las Vegas? So I was in Las Vegas doing a session on security, and after the session, now that I'm older, I can call people old. 2 older ladies came up to me and said, Bob, security is really boring. We find it really dry, but you made it exciting because you have such passion about the topic. All right. Again, the nature of security governance not being the sexiest thing on earth. Now, what we want to talk about, though, is why is it important? And I've kind of boiled it down to some very basic concepts, takeaways, if you will, of what we want to drive out when we talk about There we go. Am I comfortable with my approach? Now you're going to get a different answer from people depending on what position they're in. The CFO or the person who signs your checks is going to be comfortable with your security program when they're spending the least amount of money. The business end, the pointy end of the stick for your department or agency is going to be the most comfortable with your security program when you're not getting in their way and they're not having to remember 15-character passwords. You, as the security professional, and again, I lump myself in there having done this before, you as the security professional are the most comfortable after you've built your 10-foot high wall laced with concertina wires and patrolled by killer drones. But the issue is, the answer is different for everyone, and we as security professionals, what are we supposed to do? Well, the picture on the left says we command by edict, whereas the new wave thinking, as it should be, is we should influence and get people to understand the nature of security, why it's important to them, what the dangers are, why we are actually asking them to undertake security initiatives in the context of the business. Is it meeting my needs or my boss's needs? That's the important one. What's one of my findings when I've looked across the country in these hundreds and hundreds of security assessments? Basically the chasm, the disconnect between security leadership and business leadership. On the first day of these assessments that we do, we talk to business leadership all day long. And we come away on that first day going, wow, this agency or this department is in really good shape because senior management says so. And then we come back on the second day and we start talking to security leadership. And then on the third day, we talk to the technicians. And we walk away going, oh my God, this agency is going to sink into the ocean. The problem is, again, it's not necessarily malicious spin, although we have run into that. Right? It is that disconnect between what security really means. We as security professionals fall into the really bad habit of doing security for security's sake. What's that called? Compliance. Whereas we need to be doing security for business sake. We talk about measuring security. We talk about patching systems, managing or identifying vulnerabilities. Right? Those are good things that we have to do to manage the security program, but they mean absolutely nothing to business leadership. It doesn't tell them how well you are protecting them or how you, or more importantly, how you kept your business leadership off the front page of the newspaper. Okay, I'm dating myself. Front page of the web page. Are we doing the necessary things? Right, again, it's a question that gets various answers. Are we doing the necessary things? Have we met compliance? Is kind of what that equates to. What's the factoid here? What's your fun fact, your water cooler trivia? Very few state agencies all across the country can claim any level of compliance regardless of what industry they are aligned with, whether it's military, law enforcement, healthcare, admin, finance. Very few state agencies. Even the federal government that kind of started this whole compliance thing, it's a fact actually that it's known. Federal government reports this fact that only about 20% of federal agencies, I used to run one, have any level of real compliance in their organizations. Guess what that equates to, folks? Compliance doesn't work. We got to move beyond that. So are we doing the necessary things? But it's not necessary strictly for security. It's necessary for protection of the business, of the assets, and what the pointy end of the spear, what the agency or department is there to do, and that's serve citizens. Then the last one, probably my favorite, which is why I leave it for the punchline, are we inadvertently limiting our success by taking a compliance approach, by taking the left picture hardline approach, which makes people draw back and away and fight us at every turn, not get us our funding. So we need to start looking at that, not only do the necessary things, but make sure that they are in line to enable our success and the success of the agency, not limit it. The major point here in the punchline and the Butler did it line is that we can show, again, factually, from the results of these hundreds and hundreds of assessments, the failure of our overall security programs, the weaknesses in our overall security architectures, all driven by weaknesses in our security governance approach. And again, we'll go into more detail in this in our session this afternoon. But the bottom line is, it goes back to the old days. You can't manage what you can't measure. We have to do that. But more importantly, we have to measure it in terms of the business. But we have to take our architectural approach, not our controls-based approach, take our security architecture approach, map it to a framework, a set of objectives, business-oriented objectives, that allows us to achieve the appropriate level of security. You see in the diagram on the board, one of the things that we do, this is a security maturity model. And what you have there is basically the aggregate of these hundreds and hundreds of assessments that I keep alluding to, of the maturity of the agencies and departments that we've looked at. You can see the little green line there, and yes, that is green if you happen to be colorblind or the colors on the projector aren't good. Of what we call, everybody's mentioned it this morning, basic security hygiene. And you can see the aggregate is everybody is below basic security hygiene. And we believe that we have factual data that shows why that is, and it's driven by governance. And so what we want to talk about when we get to it this afternoon is, how do we address this problem? Gartner uses a relatively simple model, the 6 principles of resilience. And we want to talk about laying out business-oriented objectives to help us achieve our security governance goals by understanding what the business is, what the business needs, what the outcomes of the business need to be. We need to understand what actually goes on in our business. One of the great things that I always see in our assessments is going in. Another factoid here is a large majority of new CISOs or information security officers in state and local government, we call them 12-year-olds. Why? They're just out of college, they have no experience, or they happen to be the smartest network administrator in the organization, and somebody said, you can do security too. And so one of the problems is, or when we go in and do an assessment, they're learning with us. It is a great learning tool to sit in an assessment and walk through all the parts of the organization, actually learn the business, and see what security needs to do. We talk about being a facilitator rather than an obstacle, or rather than doing security for security's sake. We'll talk about a true risk-based approach. Everybody knows compliance does not equal secure, right? I think everybody understands that mantra now. And so we want to talk about translating compliance as only a baseline and then moving on from that to address the risks in the business. We want to detect and respond. I think the other cool term that I've heard and that I use regularly, monitoring is the new firewall. I just turned 60 years old, so I actually like 60 is the new 50 a lot better. But monitoring is the new firewall. Right? And so we need to close that window of vulnerability between the time something happens and the time we respond to it. Guess what that entails? The ultimate driver for that is governance. How you do it is the technology and the process. But behind it, what drives it is going to be the governance and reporting. And then we talk, of course, being people. Right? You got to trust the people. You have to train the people to be your eyes and ears and feet and arms and legs out in the field getting the work done. So with that said, I hope I've given you a teaser to fill up my room next door for this afternoon. Russ, thank you for the opportunity, and we'll see you guys around. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bob.